Okay, welcome everyone to the American Cetacean Society San Francisco Bay Chapter's October 2023 speaker event. And I'm Susan Hopp, board member responsible for our speaker program, and I'm here with fellow board member Wade Cobb. So first, for anyone new to the American Cetacean Society, we are a chapter within a national organization that is the oldest nonprofit dedicated to the protection of whales, dolphins, porpoises, and their habitat. And we do this through education, community engagement, and awarding grants towards cetacean research. We appreciate your donations in support of our mission. They fund our research grants to scientists and support our expenses around these monthly talks. It's easy to donate on our website if you haven't at the time of registration. So again, thank you. So we're recording this session, and please put your questions in the Q&A. That is better than the chat. And after the presentation, we'll do our best to get to them. All right, so tonight, we are so happy to bring back one of our most popular speakers, wildlife photographer Jodi Frediani. Tonight, time is mutable because we are accompanying Jodi on her 4th trip to the Antarctic Peninsula and her first voyage to South Georgia, which actually happened a year ago at this time, October of 2023. So get prepared for adventure and up close and personal wildlife encounters. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Jodi. She's based in Santa Cruz, but her photographic adventures have taken her around the world to Africa, South America, Siberia, Alaska, Norway, Thailand, Tonga, and to the Dominican Republic, where for 22 years she has been swimming with and photographing humpback whales on the Silver Bank. Her work has appeared in a number of national and international publications, including the BBC's Nature's Weirdest Events and Carl Safina's National Geographic blog, Ocean Views. She has won prestigious awards in multiple international photo competitions, including Nature Photographer of the Year competition sponsored by the London Natural History Museum, and the Big Picture competition sponsored by Cal Academy of Sciences. In addition to photographing wildlife in its many forms and habitats, Jodi is engaged in whale research via Fluke ID projects, both here and abroad. And with co-authors Nancy Black and Fred Sharp, she published her first paper in 2020 entitled Post-Mortem Attractions: Humpback Whales Investigate the Carcass of a Killer Whale Depredated Gray Whale Calf. Jodi is currently collaborating on 2 additional papers about humpback whale bubble use. She's also engaged in humpback whale acoustic research in Southeast Alaska, where she participated in a 3-week boat-based humpback whale field research expedition in 2021 and returned this past summer. And you can check out all of her amazing photography at jodifrediani.com. And we'll put that in the chat. So Jodi, it's so great to have you here again before we end out 2023. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Susan, and San Francisco chapter for inviting me back. It's always a pleasure. I know it's a great group of people join, and so I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to be here and there at the same time.
Exactly.
So, shall we get going?
Let's do it. Thank you.
All right.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's get on that boat.
I would just say it was really funny to hear you say that this trip took place in October 2023, a year ago. And I went, you know, about middle of this afternoon, I was looking at my slides and I realized I'd labeled all of them in 2023. So I corrected that. So we're
corrected my mistake.
And I just want to mention that it's appropriate that I'm giving this presentation to the San Francisco chapter, because it was Lynette Coftenow, who's one of your past presidents, who got me addicted to Antarctica in the first place. And the trip I went on with her was affordable at the time. It was only 10 days. We were in a triple cabin, and with a dear friend, young friend of mine from Brazil. We're still friends afterwards. We had a great time. The only thing is that on a 10-day trip, and now without doing any flying, it was 2 days crossing the Drake to get there, 2 days crossing the Drake Passage to get back, which is 4 days of what can often be very rough seas, and only 6 days on the peninsula. So that was enough to sort of whet my, my appetite, and I have been fortunate to be able to go back since. But as Susan mentioned, this was my first time going to South Georgia, and we also had the opportunity to go to the South Orkney Islands. And, oh, Susan, let's see. We didn't try this to see how I can move to the next slide.
Oh, yeah, looks good.
So this is what I call airplane window photography. And I was really fortunate. I was sitting on the left side of the plane going down. This is the Andes flying over Chile. And it was just giving us a taste of what would be up ahead with, craggy mountaintops and snow. And then we had I just feel incredibly fortunate to have been able to have this view out of the plane window, which is of Cerro Chaltén, otherwise known as Mount Fitzroy. It sits in Chile on the border with Argentina. Is an incredible rock structure that is well known as a hiking location and a mountain climbing location, even though you can't actually get to the peak because it's with vertical. But it was first climbed in 1952. So that was just in preparation. And then we gathered in Punta Arenas in Chile. And rather than take time to show you around, the city and down to the waterfront, I just thought I'd show you the mural on the building in the parking lot next to our hotel, where it was some kind of a whale, but it was really nice to actually see a whale right off the bat. So to get us started, we met in Punta Arenas, which is in the southern tip of Chile, and we flew to the Falkland Islands. We then caught a ship from the Falkland Islands. From there, we headed to South Georgia. Next, we went to the South Orkney Islands. We then went over to the northern part of the Antarctic Peninsula and actually went down the peninsula way. And then we returned, but not to Punta Arenas. We returned to Ushuaia in Argentina, the very southernmost tip of South America in Tierra del Fuego. So that's just so you know where we're going. And here we are flying over the Falkland Islands, flat, no snow. It almost looks Caribbean, with the color of the water there. It's quite beautiful. And we landed at the airport, and we then traveled by vehicle across this flat terrain with some little rocky hills and rock outcroppings and sheep. And then we got to Stanley, which is the main city. And, it's quite charming. We were there for a short amount of time. We had the opportunity to wander around on foot, did a little gift shopping and a little bit of sightseeing, went to this church, which was in walking distance, with these two sets of blue whale jawbones, which apparently were erected in 1933 to commemorate 100 years of British occupation. And I know the Argentina is not real happy about that. And they had the war in 1982, and there are still disputes about who owns what. But and then we took our first little Zodiac trip from shore later that afternoon out to our mothership. They're loading the gear of the train, and you can see the gangway. That's how we would board anytime we did or actually how we would board the Zodiacs anytime we did Zodiac cruising or a landing, and then how we would get back onto the ship. And so the weather determined whether it was actually safe to use that gangway. And we left that evening from Ushuaia. We began our crossing, and it took 2 days to actually get there, 2.5 days. The seas were challenging, as this whole trip was, but with wind and seas, you get to see lots of bird life. And so we had, black-browed albatross. We had the pintado or Cape petrel. It's a much smaller bird. We had the giant southern fulmar. We had the royal albatross. We also had wandering albatross and other seabirds. But I had to pare this down. I after having deleted lots of images when I first got back, I still have 6,000 images from this trip. So I had to pare it down to somewhere near 100 to be able to do this. So just getting a glimpse at what we actually got to do. And this is just a slide to show the fact that throughout the trip and on our crossings, we had lots of presentations from the Cheeseman staff. And this is Joy Redenberg, who many of you whale folks know. She's a wonderful anatomist, and she's a fantastic educator. She was talking about, chambered stomachs. She talked about the respiratory system of humpback whales as well. We had lectures on everything from clouds to wind to sea waves to pinnipeds, geology, everything in between. So it was very exciting to have that opportunity to learn about so many different things. And I know you're impatient, I'm sure, to see some of my photographs, but I want you to have an idea of where we're going. And if you look up here on the left, I hope you can see my cursor. Our first landing on the southern side of South Georgia is at Undine Harbor. And then we made our way around to the northern side. We were unable to make the first landing due to weather. And I say weather, if it's too windy and too choppy, it's not safe to bring the ship close enough to shore. And it's not safe to actually board onto the Zodiacs. Our second landing, or it wasn't a landing, but our second stop was at Olaf Harbor, Prince Olaf Harbor. And then we went further south to St. Andrews Bay. We backtracked to Stromness, Grytviken, and then ultimately went down to Drygalski Fjord. Sorry about that. So on our way into Undine Harbor, we still had this wonderful bird life. And you can see these are different birds here. So we had the Antarctic prion, lots and lots of those. We had the light-mantled albatross, which I think is an exquisitely marked bird. We had the gray-headed albatross, the South Georgia pintail duck, and then the snowy sheathbill, which is a little scavenger bird. And we'd see those throughout. And they're not the most attractive birds, but they have a very important job, and they do it quite well. So we were able to make a landing at Undine Harbor, which was quite exciting. We got our feet onto, first time onto South Georgia. We had elephant seals. We had fur seals, I should say the southern elephant seals, and we had Gentoo penguins. Here is a rather handsome fur seal giving us the eye. And I should say that all my photos are taken, when they weren't taken with my iPhone, they were taken with 100 to 500 millimeter telephoto lens, and oftentimes cropped. So giving the animals lots of space. Just notice this guy's got really long whiskers, which I'm sure they all do. And I'm sure that's really helpful for getting food. And when an elephant seal who could care less about us was sound asleep, you can see the plants just out there in the background, just offshore. This elephant seal was wide awake and had something to say, probably not directed at us. These are both males, but towards some of the other male bulls on the beach. And these three gentoos seemed to miss getting the memo that there was company coming. And I'm not quite sure how they got so filthy. I know they can get dirty in their nests, and then they'll go out to sea, but maybe they were on their nests for quite some time and didn't get down to the water and get cleaned off. But most of them were not such a mess. And here we have one of the gentoos in its nest, and they were nesting up a ways off the beach in a tussock area, and it looks like this Gentoo's on a tussock grass with a bunch of rocks that have been the penguin has brought in to make the nest. And just keep that in mind, because we'll see more about penguins and their pebbles in a little while. So there were a dozen or so, or I should say a dozen, there were several dozen, if not 100 Gentoos. And then we had our first king penguins. And for me, this is the first time I've seen them. We don't have any down on the Antarctic Peninsula. Very beautiful birds, very elegant, much taller than the Gentoos, and with this wonderful coloration. And as I say, very elegant, except of course for the chicks. And the chicks are a whole nother story. They're brown, they're furry, and just the gestures here are so readable, you know? It's the chick, I'm sure, is saying, feed me. And the adult on the right, I'm sure one of the parents is going, I think you've already had lunch, you've already had dinner. And I had a whole series of slides of this interaction, but I wanted you to see a lot more, so I couldn't include more of them. But there was a second adult over by the right, the one on the right in the beginning. So I don't know who the penguin on the left is, but I like to think of it as the butler who was saying, ma'am, I'm here if there's anything that you need. But there's something that's very charming and very humorous about penguins. So that was our first landing. The next day we went to Prince Olaf Harbor, and it was kind of are we going to be able to do, you know, a landing? Are we not? Because the winds would be too strong, then they would calm down. And finally, I think half of the Zodiacs were able to come out before the wind picked up, and they decided that we all needed to go back so we could get on board ship. And I thought this was really fascinating, because the tops of these rocky peaks, which I'm assuming have been carved by the wave action, have tussock grass on top of them. And so that stuff must be incredibly strongly rooted to keep the rock pier there in place. And this is what we were not able to get to in our landing, but quite extraordinary. Anyway, with elephant seals strewn along the beach and king penguins all the way up to the base of the peak in the snow. So I just wanted to bring this in early on, because humans have been coming to South Georgia at least since 1775, when Captain Cook, quote unquote, discovered it. And he brought rats who jumped ship, obviously not deliberately. And they became a problem because the rats are anathema to the ground nesting birds. And it wasn't until 2013 that the first effort was the second part of the phase, but I guess they started doing that in 2011. They were dropping bait from helicopters. They had team rat members. Probably the most important statistic there is that 8,000 tea bags were ordered for the field camp. And then they pretty much eradicated all of the rats by 2015. They had a monitoring phase where they brought in rodent detection dogs, and the area was declared completely rat-free. The island was declared rat-free by 2018. But what doesn't show up in this timeline is that there were also reindeer that were introduced by the Norwegian whalers. Now, reindeer are native to the Arctic region, not the Antarctic, but obviously they can get by in cold conditions. And the whalers thought this would be great to have a source of meat and sport for hunting. And they continued to hunt them while the whaling stations were still open. And I guess hunting continued until around 1980, and then it stopped, and the reindeer got completely out of control, and they were overeating the vegetation. And the next thing you know, they had to eradicate them, and they managed it during the same period as the rat eradication. They took out something like 7,000 reindeer, and many of them were actually sold to the meat was sold to cruise ships. A lot of it was used. So our next day, all in 2022 here, we went much further south, if you remember from that map, to St. Andrews Bay. And this was a true gift to us. The sun was shining. We planned to be there all day. We had king penguins, and I was in my happy place. You can see it's a beautiful bay surrounded by mountain peaks, and this was just a few of the penguins who are there. And in order to get to see the rest, we needed to cross this river of meltwater. And that is Scott Diss on the right, who is leading a couple of us across. And it's a good thing he did. Last thing you want to do is fall and get sopping wet in this very cold water. And my camera bag there is not sufficiently waterproof. So we used these sticks. The current was strong enough that you had to be very careful where you placed your feet on the rocks, out of sight. Make sure that you never lifted one foot without having the other firmly planted in your sticks. But it was absolutely worth getting to the other side, because this is what greeted us. And all those brown bundles are probably 8-month, more or less, old chicks. The adults, you can see where the water comes up to the shore. The penguins continue all the way to the far side of the bay. And I've read figures of 150,000 to 500,000 mating pairs of king penguins just on St. Andrews Bay. So one way or the other, it's a hell of a lot of birds. Not all of them were gathered down there. Some were off to the right from where that photograph was taken, and they were molting. It takes these birds 2 months to complete the molt, and during that time, they cannot get into the water, and therefore they don't feed. So they kind of hang out together as they can. In this case, I think they were actually standing on snow, and they seemed to huddle together to maybe conserve warmth. But there were penguins every which way you looked. Just another close-up a little bit of some of the chicks and the adults. And if you notice, the one on the left is in that classic begging posture, probably its parents, and says, "I just feed me," which is appropriate. They've got to put on weight as they grow so that they are ready to hit the water on their own. And I love this image, the penguin conversation here, and just the difference between these very warmly, I want to say dressed, but feathered chicks, and the adults who are sleeker, and the wonderful feet that, they travel on land and kick with in the water. So here we have some coming out of the water. They may have gone out to feed themselves or to bring back some food for those begging chicks. And then they clamber ashore, wend their way through the elephant seals, and so the cycle goes on. And of course, there were the elephant seals. And I don't know if any of you local folks have had the opportunity to go down to Ano Nuevo, south of San Francisco, but it's a wonderful opportunity in January and maybe even February to go see all the males and the harems and the pupping females on the beach there. But you can't really walk amongst them. And we were cautioned to be careful what we did here, but they were, all along the beach, and we just kept a bit of a distance and watched their behavior. There's a big bull, very possibly a harem master, who is bellowing to keep either one or just more bulls in general away, letting them know he's on duty. And I know that some of the studies done from Ano Nuevo, they've found that other males recognize the individual voices of the various rivals that they have to contend with, and they know who to watch out for, and who they might want to take on in a fight. So this is just a little personal story here, because I had planned, we had been told that Zodiacs would be going back during the day, and I had thought, well, okay, I'll be out. I'll go back, I'll grab a quick lunch, I'll use the restroom, and then I'll come back. And when I went to talk to Ted Cheeseman about it, he said, "Oh, you don't want to do that." He said, "You don't want to leave. You got to stay here." So I said, "Well, I need to go pee." And he said, "Well, just go down to the end of the beach. Nobody cares." And I was like, okay. So, and Scott had told me I could share his lunch, although I never saw him again. And, I get to the end of the beach, and there's this there's this bull in front of me, maybe a young one, but a bull. And then we've got, staff and crew ready to take the Zodiacs back. And if you look in the water there on the right, there's another bull with his girlfriend, and he's complaining about the folks with the Zodiac. Well, I had to wait because I needed to film this action of this bull who is mating with a female. And when I observed something like this, I hope you can hear me over the waves. I'll lower that a little bit.
We can hear you.
You can hear? Okay. I wonder, I mean, it's just a miracle to me that species can propagate, because, this guy weighs a fortune. I mean, a ton or more. I forget how much they weigh. He can't crush the female, and he doesn't have a lot of mobility there. He's got the waves coming up against him with maybe help. And yet he manages to, populate, and the species carries on again. But it's quite remarkable. So after that, the bull in front has calmed down. That bull was calm. The folks of the Zodiac said, let's go. They took it out. And it's a lot easier for a man to say, just go down to the end of the beach. But anyways, I relieved myself, and then I went back to, catch more of the action and get more photos. Here we have a female who has recently given birth, maybe an hour or so earlier. She's got a new pup, large pup, nursing, and we have a couple of skuas who are taking care of the afterbirth. So it was a long day, and we finally went back for dinner. It was a long day and an absolutely fabulous day. And I've put this here just to caution any of you who might be a bit squeamish. Two of the following slides are what we saw once we got back to the ship. And, after the long day, we get back, we go down to our cabins or up to our cabins. We change our clothes, we're getting ready for dinner. And over the PA, we hear that there's a leopard seal off the stern who has got a king penguin. And at that point, I felt really fortunate that I was in on the second deck at the stern, because the dining hall was right above us, and then out through the back of the dining hall got to the stern, and I was able to rush back there quickly and get a front row view of this leopard seal feeding on, or getting ready to feed on, this poor king penguin. And it was quite amazing, because the seal had clipped the fur all the way around the penguin's neck. Penguin is still alive here. And then proceeded to begin to feed on it. And, this was, I don't know, it was like right beneath us, right next to the ship. I think the leopard seal had probably used the ship to help contain the penguin. And this is the end of the graphic images. Then we've got the leopard seal fending off a giant fulmar who wanted some of the action. And it was quite an amazing end to a very spectacular day on St. Andrews Bay. The following day, we doubled back and we went up to Stromness, which was an old whaling station and a very significant location on South Georgia. And as you can see, it's raining. And I wondered a little bit what these propellers are there for. Well, the whaling began, I believe, around 1907, and initially they had a factory ship, and then they began shore-based whaling operations in 1913, and then around 1930 they closed this whaling station because the whale stocks had collapsed, and they opened up a ship repair restoration station instead, for handling the ships from the other whaling stations that were still in operation. And if you look here, you can see elephant seals beginning to reclaim the shore. Those buildings look a lot newer to me than 1907 or 1913 even. They even look more recent than the 1930s. So I don't know quite the history. The buildings were off limits to us. And still raining. We've got king penguins here again, which was nice to see, a bit of snow on the ground. And I just tell a brief story here about Ernest Shackleton. And he is so well known at this point, you can kind of consider Shackleton to be, a household word. But at the time that he was alive, he kind of was in the shadow of explorers like Amundsen and Scott. And on this particular adventure or journey, he was in charge of the Endurance and was going to be sailing down to the Weddell Sea, and from there planned to cross with his men the Antarctic continent. And a second ship had gone down, the Aurora, and they were leaving supply packets along the way. And that was the hope that the plan was that he would be able to, make this transcontinental hike, walk. But it wasn't to be. That was like in 1914. And then the following year, the Endurance became fast in sea ice in the Weddell Sea. And it drifted for a while. And they hoped, I think that was like, that was late in the year. And then actually that was early in the year. And then by October 24th, exactly 108 years from today, he ordered his crew to abandon the Endurance because it was starting to take on water. And so they got into the lifeboats, and they hoped that they would be able, the ship had already been drifting towards Paulet Island, which was right at the tip of the northern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. They had hoped to be able to get there. They didn't. At some point, he said, this has gone long enough. And one of his crew members retrofitted one of their ships, the James Caird, and they set sail. No, actually, I take that back. All of them, they set sail for Elephant Island once they abandoned the ship, the Endurance. It took them 5 days to get there. And they got to Elephant Island, which was a pretty inhospitable place. And at that point, Shackleton said, we've got to go someplace where, we can be taken care of. So one of his men retrofitted the James Caird, and he took a small group of men with him, left the rest on Elephant Island, and they set out for South Georgia. And, when I think about what it was like crossing those seas in a ship that's nearly 300 feet long, and ice strengthened, et cetera, and these guys are in this, large for a life ship, but very small by comparison. They got to the southern part of, or the south side of South Georgia. They couldn't go to shore immediately. The weather was too bad. They finally got to shore somewhere to the south of Undine Harbor, where we landed. And then Shackleton took his men on a route that had never been used before and crossed the island. So on mountain passes, and managed to find his way to Stromness Harbor. And there he, explained the situation. They got boats, they went back, they picked up the rest of the crew that were on South Georgia on the far side. They went back to Elephant Island, picked up the rest of his crew there, didn't lose a single man. And then they sent another ship to the Aurora that had also gotten stuck, and they were able to bring back those members as well. I think 3 men died in that from that ship. But Shackleton became well known for his exceptional leadership skills and the fact that he was able to do this extraordinary thing and not lose a single man from his team. So that afternoon, we went to Grytviken, and Grytviken is where Shackleton was ultimately buried a couple of years later. And it had taken them, it was like 2 years, or I think, from the time that they set out to go to the continent before they were finally all saved. And I chose to stay aboard our ship, the Plancius, that afternoon because I learned that my rain gear was not waterproof. And if you look at the down here in the right-hand corner, you see a little red. That's one of our Zodiacs going to shore. There's an old ship that's rusting on the shoreline. And then there is the museum in that white building, which was built in 1992. And over here, we have the church that looks like it's the same era. There's a shop and a post office there, and remains of the whaling station. And then on the far side of the island is the graveyard, and that large tombstone is Mark Shackleton's grave. So I did my sightseeing here with my telephoto lens from the relative dryness of the Plancius. The following day, we headed further south to dry Galski Fjord, and the crew would always consult with Ted and some of his other team members, you know, who were looking at the weather charts and all sorts of things, and decided that it might be good to shelter inside this bay. We did not get off the ship, but we did some wonderful sightseeing, little bits of icebergs there, beautiful peaks. And I just want to call your attention to how long the bow, you know, area of this ship is, because that's going to come in and be important later on. And we had these mountain peaks, we had glaciers in there, quite spectacular scenery and some sunshine. And as we left, we got our first humpback whale, who was feeding on krill along with these Antarctic prions. And I checked this whale. This was the first sighting of this whale in Happy Whale, a new whale to science. And she was named, we don't know if it was a she, but anyways, the whale was named Estelle. So that was our trip, our visits to South Georgia. And from there, we set out to cross the Scotia Sea to head to the South Orkney Islands. And that was an adventure in itself. So, just to give you an idea, it was a 2-day crossing. That's probably a little longer because we probably started at night. And there we have one member of the hospitality team grabbing a cup that's about to tip over. And the woman on the far side of the table there is looking out the window at the swell, which is quite significant. This is on the 3rd deck. And one of our staff, the Cheeseman staff, is sitting at the table on the right here with the thumb hold. And to me, that thumb hold characterized our crossings, because if you look on the left, the woman is sitting in a bench seat. Those are secured to the floor. But, you know, in order for the person at the window to get out, everybody else has to move. So the other seats are not secure, and they'll move. And if you are not paying attention and a big swell hits the ship broadside, you can tip over and have a domino game where, you know, the whole series of chairs fall over and people hit the ground, which did happen, and probably more than once. So we had 2 days of this crossing of the Scotia Sea, and it was also cold outside. As you can see, the seawater was splashing up and forming icicles, and we had penguins on the brain. So this is actually the front window of the observation lounge up on the 5th deck, as the seawater would get up there and crystallize in this really funny pattern. But we could still see out of the other windows, and I can't remember if I went outside to get this photograph or not, because it was pretty windy. But I mean, I often had to wait for somebody stronger than me to hold the door open or make sure that it didn't slam in the wind to get outside. We had winds that were 30 to 50 knots throughout our crossings. Not highly atypical weather, but at the end of the trip, the crew and the Cheeseman staff and Ted said it was the longest spell of bad weather that they'd ever had in 20 years of being down there. So they'd had worse weather, but not for such an extended period of time. So here we've got a gorgeous iceberg. You can see the sea crashing up against it, hoping to carve it out. We've got a fin whale. You know, whale people, it's always yay whales. So that was quite exciting. And then I call this the sperm whale iceberg, which was probably the most extraordinarily different and unique iceberg I've ever seen. The black is glacial sort of scree as the glacier moves down the landmass and picks up some of the soil. The dark blue is when the ice is so old it gets compressed and the air is all out of it. And if you look over here on this blue part of the glacier, there are these little specks, and those are actually, I think, chinstrap penguins. And we were wondering, how do they get up there? And then you could see that a wave would come along and just wash them right up onto that little ledge, and how they understand that that's a safe place to be, and that you know, they can, you know, shelter there a little bit is quite remarkable to me. And you can see the waves breaking in the inlet there. And because it was such an extraordinary piece of ice, our captain circumnavigated this iceberg for us. Here is a photograph of a pintado. It looks like a chip off the old block. Amazing coloration in this image, and the little patches of snow up on top. And another view. This is a southern fulmar flying along this spectacular glacier. That's the seawater in the foreground. So we finally reach the South Orkney Islands after our two-plus day crossing. And just to give you an idea, this looks like a beautiful abstract. This is Brent, one of our excellent guides. And the colors are really sweet, but anybody who's ever looked at Windy knows you don't want to see pink and purple, because that's a pretty serious wind. And if you look up here, this is South Georgia, and everything between South Georgia and the South Orkneys is orange, pink, you know, sometimes purple. So some pretty strong winds the whole way. And then the next leg of our trip is going to be down to the peninsula through even stronger winds. So, but here we are in the South Orkneys. We got to do a landing at Shingle Cove. Lots of snow. We're getting further south, so we're going to have more snow as we go along. And we get to take a walk. Some of the little people over here are penguins who've come as the welcoming committee. And we were able to do some zodiac cruising, you know, while, you know, and take turns. You can see it's snowing, and there's a leopard seal doing its own cruising around a small iceberg out on the bay there, and a good picture of a leopard seal, and quite fearsome predators, and they are bold, and they come right up to the Zodiac sometime, check us out, you know, they want to see what we're like, but they're mostly interested in penguins. And this was our first opportunity to see Adelie penguins. And the Gentoos and the king penguin populations are actually thriving and doing quite well. Not so much the Adelies. The change in the sea conditions, the warming is not doing them any favors. But here is a handsome fellow who is carrying the pebble again. Remember the rocks. And he is bringing this to show his mate that he has the skill to build a nice nest and wants to impress her. She seems to be duly impressed. And these penguins will, at this point, they're able to use their feet to sort of dig a hole in the snow and build a nest with the pebbles where they incubate their eggs. And I wanted to show you how adaptable these penguins are. They're excellent as little torpedoes in the water, but give them an opportunity, and they have their own built-in sled. So they've got their feet, and that's the rapid way to get downhill. And for all I know, they do it because it's fun. And I learned that some of the people who did more hiking than I did, and some of our landings actually used that same technique for getting back down after the hike, although I'm sure they weren't nearly as capable as the penguins. We also had an opportunity in South Orkney here to see this beautiful mother and her pup Weddell seal. They breed elsewhere, but these two had come ashore, and you know, we're relaxing. We're not concerned about us at all. And I included this photograph of the Antarctic krill. And anybody who's seen the krill up here in North America, it's about a ½ inch long. And these krill get to be 2.5 inches. They're almost more like shrimp. And they form the base of the food chain. They're incredibly important. Seals feed on them. Crab eater seals are really krill eater seals. We've got the whales, the blue whales, of course, and the humpback whales will feed on them. We've got penguins are all feeding on the krill, and anything that doesn't feed directly on the krill is feeding on fish that are feeding on the krill. So the krill is absolutely important, and I encourage people to think twice before using krill products from Antarctica. I know there are efforts to prevent overfishing, but it's not always successful. And just to show how rapidly the conditions can change, on our way back to the Plancius from our landing, we had a bit of a snowstorm, and see one of our crew members waiting for us to return. So as we departed, we had crossed the Scotia Basin to get there. Now we have to cross the Powell Basin, and we've got humpback whales. Yay, humpbacks. So I think this is the same whale, and actually was quite close to our ship. So it was pretty exciting to see it. We're up on the 6th deck at the where the bridge is, because it was just too dangerous to go out on the lower decks at that point in time. And to give you an idea, here's the Powell Basin crossing, and it was like this. We remember Brent's picture of Windy showing how purple and pink it was. And here's the bow of the ship. And I would just say that our crew is exceptionally capable and experienced, and knew that you had to travel slower than normal in these sea conditions in order to be safe. So our crossings all took longer than normal. And this is up on the bow where all those people were standing earlier. And then you see this tower on the right, just to give you a sense of where we are, where the observation lounge is, up on the 5th deck. There's Brent. I'm gonna play this one again, because that happened all day long for 2 days. And I think it got to the point where probably on this crossing, it was decided not to have any lectures, so people weren't encouraged to be walking around the ship. They could just stay in their cabins. And I did learn that some of the folks who had nicer cabins than we had, with water kettles and things, had the water kettles flying around. And even though we were told, put all your things on the floor, your computers and stuff like that, one woman actually got water spilled onto her computer. We were fortunate down on the 2nd deck at the stern to not have such movement, and not be blessed with water kettles. So we then headed, as we finally began to approach the northern tip of the peninsula, we went from the west side over to the east side. And you can see Paulet Island there, which is what Shackleton was aiming for and never quite got to. And we had hoped to get to Paulet Island ourselves, but again, the weather did not cooperate. And we went past the Brown Bluff area, which the first slide, my opening slide with all those clouds, was from that area. And everybody was out on deck looking for emperor penguins, which might be in the area. We didn't see any, but Allie, one of the staff members, was looking behind the ship, and she saw tall dorsal and blows, and lo and behold, this was in the area called the Rebus and Terror Gulch, which is the northern part of the Weddell Sea. We had type B orcas, and that was incredibly exciting to see. So when she found them, the captain turned the ship around, went back, and we were able to follow them for a while. They have these huge eye patches. They have some different coloration in the saddle patches, some youngsters in there. So it was an excellent sighting. And then we continued to head south, and now we were going through the Gerlache Strait. And I'm not 100% certain, but I think the reason we went around to the eastern side of the peninsula at that point, which enabled us to see the type B orcas, was because Windy showed just more of that pink and purple along the west side of the peninsula. And you can see a bit of what, what the strong seas look like. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's absolutely spectacular, but it also means there's a lot of motion on the ship. And I fortunately don't have a problem with seasickness. I know some people ended up in their cabins for a while, a bit unhappy, but there's nothing anyone can do about it. It's absolutely spectacularly beautiful. And then just to locate us again, we've come down here. We ended up on Cerva Cove. We then headed further south to Damoy Point, Port Lockroy. Don't worry, I'm going to take you there in just a minute. We went back a little bit to Paradise Harbor and Danko Island, and then we headed to Deception Island. So let's see where we went. Most places. Here's Cerva Cove misspelled. Base Primavera is one of 15 Argentine bases in Antarctica. And I was amazed in doing a little research for this presentation that they had 15. And they're now all scientific research stations, but I think it's also a way of Argentina laying a bit of claim, even though they don't own Antarctica or the peninsula. And we've got penguins. And I should say, this trip happened in October, November, and that's springtime in the southern hemisphere, and which means that winter should be past and the snow's melting, and that's what the penguins expect. That's what the people expect. I don't think there were any people staffing this base yet because spring was very late to arrive last year. So, as with climate we see everywhere, it's not always doing what we have expected, but it did make for some pretty exciting zodiac cruising. Again, the icebergs here were quite unique, and we had a good time on the zodiac cruising. We got to see porpoising penguins, a Gentoo penguin, a whole batch of them together swimming back, and then climbing up, out of the water and up the mountainside. Well, this is just an amazing march for me to see. And I understand, because we had lectures on penguins as well, that the higher up they go, the sooner the snow is liable to melt and the faster they'll be able to build their nests and actually start to, incubate their eggs. So it was quite exciting. And we remember that tobogganing penguin from earlier. Here we have a chin strap who seems to either have forgotten or not known that it's not so easy to toboggan in powder. So this effort ended more as a faceplant. As I said, penguins are quite entertaining. And here we have Damoy Point the next day with even more snow. And I don't remember what those buildings are for, but they're basically right now, they're for holding snow, and they're just almost fully buried. But we've still got a Zodiac that's come to shore. Our staff has dug out steps and enabled people to climb onto the shore and do another landing. And here we're in snowshoes. And just to show you that I wasn't always in the Zodiac shooting, but I came on shore and wandered about, but mostly looking for penguins to photograph. So we then went to Port Lockroy, and the Gentoos were quite active courting. I was just charmed by their behavior. Here, the female in front is touching her partner with her quite stiff tail. Here's a gesture, that's just very beautiful, the courting. Unfortunately, there was too much snow on the ground, so I'm not sure, maybe they just had an extended courting period because they couldn't really dig holes and build, start nesting. But we've got them climbing up, I don't think that's actually a glacier in the background there, but this is a bit of glacier on the right. Beautiful, beautiful color. Very dense ice, and penguins in little clusters along the mountainside. We did Zodiac cruising. We had more humpback whales. I know some of the other Zodiacs had even better sightings of the humpbacks. And then we've got penguins leaving and going back out to sea, because of course they've got to feed themselves. And a little more of the humor of penguins.
Yeah,
A little help from their friends. So they've got to navigate the chunks of ice, the rocks. Hope there aren't any leopard seals around. Well, it's quite a strenuous life being a penguin. And I'm always impressed at how incredibly strong they are. And I will say this this one I loved, and it needs a caption or two. I look at it and it feels like the Gentoo is saying, I mean, the chinstrap penguin is saying, did my family go that way? And the Gentoos are saying, no, we told you we went this way. And this image happens to be in the People's Choice, up for People's Choice in the Wildlife Comedy Awards competition. So I'll see if I can actually find that and maybe put it in the chat if anybody wants to vote for it. But it was just a lot of fun to see that. And then Zanvers Bay, we did more cruising. We saw more gorgeous icebergs, the shapes and sizes, and sometimes these things get tipped upside down, and what you see was underwater before, and quite spectacular. And lots of snow and lots of slushy ice on the water. And there are our zodiacs. You know, they've gathered snow, the drivers, they're waiting for us to board. And you know, it's just an extraordinary environment. It's nothing like we are used to here in California, that's for sure. And then we stopped at Almirante Brown, another Argentine station. You can see our people through the snow scattered around the buildings on the left and working their way, the hardy souls. You know, I love the fact that at least the people who come on these Cheeseman's trips are in it for the experience, and they don't let a little bit of weather get in their way. So, you know, it was, you know, we were out there taking advantage of everything that was thrown at us. And the staff, you know, deserved just huge thank yous, because they had to do all this hard work that ordinarily at this time of year they wouldn't have to do. And certainly by February, which is when I've been before, you know, they've had a summertime to melt. So these steps had to have been hand dug by various staff members, Cheeseman's folks. We've got ropes to come back down because it's icy, you can slide and slip. And we waited in line just like the penguins at some points, you know, to get back down, to get back into the zodiacs, so we could make our way back to the planches. And here we have Frosty, who enjoys the snow. You know, a little bit of whiteout conditions there. And then we made our way back through the Gerlache Strait. I remember being there in the past in sunshine. It's a spectacular area with huge mountain peaks, but here we had a different sort of beauty with the snow-covered icebergs, the dark background, and just stunning to see. And as we made our way north, we headed for Deception Island. And Deception Island is, I suppose, deceiving. It's actually an active volcano, and it's a submerged caldera, so that one can actually take a ship inside when the weather conditions allow, which they did not allow for us. So we kind of circumnavigated around it. We did have there were some buildings on one side. We weren't able to go inside, but we then headed north on our way back to the mainland. And this is just a giant thank you to some of our crew. That's the captain on the left of the microphone. I believe the fellow on the right is our engineer. And I apologize, I don't remember. Maybe it was the first mate in the middle. And, we were having a gathering with the crew to give them our thanks. And then they safely brought us back to Ushuaia in the tip of Tierra del Fuego. So it was quite an extraordinary trip. It's very different from the others I was on. And I looked at Windy this afternoon, about an hour before this presentation, and a lot of wind to the east of South Georgia and absolutely spectacular conditions between South Georgia and the peninsula and the Falklands. And I've got friends who are down there now. I can't wait to hear from them when they come back. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Jodi. That was incredible. So we've got a decent amount of questions to get through, if that's okay.
I'll try.
I'll try to keep them all like, in similar topics and not go too far off or too far all over the place. So I guess the first one, did you happen to see any Japanese whalers while you were down there?
No.
No whalers. That's good.
No. I have some vague recollection from something in the past, but it might have been something I saw on TV. But no, there were no whalers. I mean, we saw every once in a while, we would see another cruise ship down there, but they do try and schedule so that you're not all at the same place, because there are rules and regulations about how many people can come to shore at any given landing at a time, which I think is limited to 100, which is what the smaller ships carry. So we might see one, over that way a couple of times, but most of the time we're on our own. We might see some sailboats, some really hardy souls.
Makes sense. And I think you inspired a few people.
Wait,
sorry.
One at a time.
I was going to say, isn't it a protected area? I don't think there's any whaling that's allowed, right?
There's not supposed to be. So I think Wade was talking about rogue, or the person who asked the question was talking about rogue Japanese whalers. But no, we haven't seen any. And I haven't heard anything about them lately. I think maybe Sea Shepherd got rid of them.
That's awesome. And then, I think you inspired some folks. Do you have any recommendations for particular companies or group leaders that run these trips?
So I have traveled, this was Cheeseman's Ecology Safaris, who I've traveled with 3, was this my 4th time or my 5th time? I think it was my 5th time. Anyways, I've traveled with every time except the first one. And they've done an outstanding job. I wouldn't go with anybody else. I will say this though, the company was started by Doug and Gail Cheeseman, and Ted Cheeseman of Happy Whale is their son. They both passed in the last few years, and Ted then took over the company, and he has just sold it to Scott Davis and his partner. And I showed you Scott early on, and Scott was one of my very favorite guides with Cheeseman. So I'm hoping that he will carry on in the Cheeseman tradition, where, most of the companies do the same kind of things, in that they have, guest speakers, they have presentations. I shouldn't say, some of the companies may cater to a different clientele who want to go there, but are not necessarily as physically fit. So they're not, they may do more Zodiac cruising and less landings. Some of the larger ships, I personally would not go on myself, because they don't do landings because they've got too many people, or they have to do them in shifts. But I've not gone. The first time I went with Lynette, it was a different company, and it's so hard to compare. But it was when I did my next trip with Cheeseman's and saw the effort that Ted put into, the information that we were given every day about where we were going, what it was going to be like, what to expect. It was fantastic. So I'm sure there are others. I've got friends who are crew on a number of different companies. I'm sure they do great jobs. I just don't have any personal experience with them.
Makes sense. And then kind of on a similar token, I assume this is a no, because I guess they would need seaplanes or some crazy landing gear. But do you know of any tour companies that fly from place to place?
I don't think that's allowed, and I don't think it would be safe. And so my educated guess is no. I know that the first time, remember the first 2 times I went to Antarctica, we cruised the Drake Passage to get down to the peninsula. The next trip, we actually flew from Punta Arenas to, I want to say, St. George Island, and then we caught a ship, and so we bypassed the Drake. So it is possible to do that for people who really don't want, or don't do well with those kind of crossings, or don't, can't afford the time. But I'm not aware. I mean, I know that some of the, like on Antarctica, the continent at McMurdo Station and places like that, they bring in these big, military type planes to fly the crew in, and then fly them back out. But those are very rare, and it's not an everyday trip that happens, that kind of thing. So I don't think that one can actually fly there.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. Now we have a couple questions about some of the animals, if that's okay. The first one is about the southern elephant seals. From what you've seen up north, are they a lot bigger? Someone said they look a lot bigger in the pictures than some of the ones that they've seen in California.
That's a good question. I'm not real good with numbers and retaining that kind of information. They might be a little bit bigger. I mean, I've been close to some of the younger bulls out at Ana Nueva because they don't follow the rules, and they're out where we have to walk to get to the viewing platforms, and they're pretty big. So I would encourage that person to use Google as your friend, to find out the difference in size. They might be larger. I just can't tell you that for sure.
Makes sense. We had Natasha just chimed in. It was helpful that they are a bit bigger than U.S. elephant seals. And then I guess kind of on a similar token. Sorry, we had one more about animals. Oh yeah, why do you mentioned that the emperor penguins stay a bit further north and don't really go as far south as parts of Antarctica? Did they tell you a reason for that, or is that another one for Google?
They weren't further north. I mean, there supposedly were some around where we saw the type B orcas. But I have to confess, because I have never seen an emperor penguin, I don't know much about them at all. I just know that the king penguins, you don't have them down on the peninsula. You have them on South Georgia. You have some, I believe, in the Falklands. But again, I know that there are trips to the Falklands alone where people go because there are all kinds of penguins and some other wildlife there, but I've not done that.
Oh, that's my fault. I think the question was actually about king penguins, not about emperor penguins. So same question, but on king penguins.
Well, then maybe I answered it.
Yeah, I think you did. Thank you. And then another one, and since you've been a few times, maybe you have personal experience, but what would be different if you went a little bit later in the Antarctic summer? Would the weather be different? Would you see different species, that kind of thing?
So I've gone, the other trips I did were like February, March, and you are liable to see more whales. We've seen lots of humpback whales down there. On my bucket list was lunge feeding humpback whales down in Antarctica. We got to see that, got to see feeding, or not feeding, but porpoising minke whales. So February is a time to see more whales, and the weather is generally better. I mean, it was ridiculously warm, sometime, when I was down there, like maybe even 70 degrees during the daytime. But they've gone through a summer, so a lot of the snow has melted. You've still got glaciers, you've still got icebergs. You can have quote unquote iceberg graveyards where there's lots of them around there, but the weather is generally better. Although this particular trip, the weather was worse than normal. And the other thing about You know, here I showed and we talked about courting penguins and penguins, you know, getting ready to building nests and sitting on nests. In the fall, you've got young chicks, you know, Gentoo chicks. You've got, we actually saw eggs on the last trip I was on, the previous trip I was on. We had very small chicks, you know, just like, I don't know, 6 inches tall or something like that. We've had, so there are a lot more, gonna have a lot more chicks. You've got, I've actually seen, I mean, it was amazing that we had that leopard seal taking the adult penguin this time, the adult king. But I've been out there where we're in the Zodiac and depending where on the peninsula you are, because, you know, it's different latitudes and the chicks are born, you know, at different times somewhere where you are. We would have some juveniles and they're trying to get into the water, and, you know, the leopard seals are doing a great job imitating rocks. And the next thing is you've got a juvenile that, you know, has gone under the water and a leopard seal has nabbed it. So, and we've seen more seals and more seals in the water. You know, I think we might have seen a seal or two. Photographs weren't worth showing, but, you know, so there's more young animals in our springtime, in our late winter, and their fall.
Makes sense. And there was one, you had that amazing picture of the iceberg that you called the sperm whale iceberg. Is
Yeah.
that it for that one, and for others that you showed? Is that, are those real names that are given, or is that what folks call them? Because I'm like, presumably the shapes are probably changing every time there's a trip down there.
It's my real name. I made it up.
Oh, great.
No, that was just, I mean, you know, all the time I've been there, I've never seen an iceberg that looked like that. I've seen icebergs that are multicolored because they've got, you know, glacial scree mixed in them. But that one, and I wouldn't be surprised if that one had flipped upside down at some point, because certainly it's out there in the open sea. So it's going to get a lot of wave action and swell on stuff like that. And even closer to shore, the icebergs will sometimes flip upside down, and the sculpting of the water, you know, in the ocean is different than the sculpting from the wind and the waves on the top. So you get, you know, you get these different formations.
Makes sense. And I think just one more that just came in, kind of back to species. So do you know where the type B orcas go, and what their migration patterns are, and how they differ from the orcas that we see in the Monterey Bay?
That's a good question. And I confess I'm a humpback person. So I do know that there are two types of, there's the large and the small. And I believe the small are often seen in the Gerlache Strait, and the large are more out in the ocean. And I do know that I've read about some actually going to warmer waters, and I don't know how far north they go, but they don't come up here. So I apologize that I'm not.
No worries at all. No need to apologize. I think that wraps up the questions for today. Susan, I don't know if you have anything else before we wrap here.
Oh, I just, I know I speak for so many others. I just feel so full and rich from going through all your photos and getting your narrative. So Jodi, thank you so much.
You are quite welcome. Thank you for inviting me. Is there any way, since I don't usually get to see these because I'm too busy talking, that you can copy some of the comments? Oh, look, here's somebody. Oh, Joanne, bless her. The southern elephant seal bulls can be 4,000 to 8,000 pounds, and the northern ones 3,000 to 5,500. So, yeah, a little bit larger.
And yeah, we had some great commentary from folks. I think, Susan, there's a way from in Zoom to kind of get the transcripts afterward, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
This recording will be up on our website within just a couple days and on our YouTube channel. And I'll save the chat file and you will have you will see it, Jodi.
Okay.
So we have to look at having you back in 2024, maybe around Alaska or something.
How about Mongolia?
I
No,
know. I really would like to do that one. We would separate. We would go on land for that one, but yeah.
yeah.
So
Well, we could do Alaska. Who knows?
okay, we'll figure it out.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you everyone for being here, and I'm sorry I can't meet you in person.
I know. We're still hoping we might figure out a in-person event for 2024. And I just also want to mention to anyone who's still here that our final speaker event of 2023 will be on November 14th. So it's the Tuesday before the week of Thanksgiving. That's when we always do our November. And we will have Dr. Kim Holland from the Shark Lab at the University of Hawaii. So it should be a good way to end the year, but onward and upward. Thanks again, Jodi. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Night.
Good night.